Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. And while obviously it is the heart of college football season, the biggest story in sports, in college sports on Monday, is the cancellation of the Orlando bubble that was slated to really kick off the college basketball season. And it has wide-ranging effects as essentially every major brand in college basketball was supposed to be there. Kentucky was supposed to be there. Duke, Michigan State, Kansas, UCLA, Gonzaga, Tennessee, Texas Tech. I could go on and on and on and on and on. But let's get into what happened, why it happened, what the next steps are, and why it isn't necessarily doom and gloom. I had a lot of people ask me, does this mean we're just not going to get out of conference college basketball at all and we're going to go to league only like we did in football? I don't think so, not as of yet, not based on the people that I talked to across college basketball. So the backstory on this, and I do think the backstory is important, is that obviously, look, it all stems from the NBA, right? The NBA started their season, they really restarted their season in this bubble in Orlando. And I think wherever you stand on the NBA, LeBron James, social issues, whatever, I think we can all agree that from an aesthetic standpoint, from a standpoint of safely playing games, the NBA bubble went about as successful as it possibly could. Get everybody down there, you test them on the way in, you quarantine them on the way in, spend a few days, do a few practices, start the season, and you finish the season essentially with no issues at all. For the NBA season. There were little things here and there. Lou Williams leaves, he goes to a strip club, that kind of stuff. But for the most part, the NBA season was played without a hitch from the beginning of July until the Lakers were crowned the NBA champion about 3 weeks ago. And so I bring all this up because the idea, the understanding was that at least to start the college basketball season, we would be playing in a bubble. And the idea behind playing in a bubble in college basketball is very simply this. We avoid a lot of the same issues that plagued college football to start their season, as far as every conference having different testing protocols, every conference having different rules, different safety measurements, whatever, right? And so a big part of the reason that, say, college football went with conference-only games in the SEC, in the Big Ten, in the Pac-12, in the MAC, and the Mountain West is because essentially those conferences had no idea what the other conferences were doing to keep their players safe. So the SEC just said, you know what, would we love to beat up on Coastal Carolina and Furman and UMass and whoever to start the season? Yeah, we would. We would love those games. But what's best for our 14 teams in the SEC is to just play league-only games. That way you know when Georgia comes into Kentucky this weekend, you know that Georgia has been doing the exact same things in terms of testing, in terms of safety measurements, in terms of all that stuff that Kentucky has been doing. Same with when LSU plays Alabama later this year, and when LSU plays Auburn this week, and when Auburn played South Carolina a few weeks ago. That is why the SEC, why many conferences went to league-only games in college football. And so the idea behind a bubble in college basketball is that you largely avoid that, right? You don't have to worry about, if you're Kentucky, what the other team is doing that you're playing against if they're not in the SEC, if you're in a bubble. If you got 25 teams in a bubble, you know what happens? Everybody has the same testing on the way in. Everybody has the same quarantining on the way in. You got to pass a certain number of tests before you're allowed to play against another team. And you know that everybody is safe when they step on the court. And so the idea was, we're going to play all these bubbles all across the country for the out-of-conference portion of play. And then when we get to the start of conference play, then we'll do what football's doing. When Tennessee has to play Auburn, they'll travel to Auburn. When Auburn has to play Missouri, they go to Missouri. When Missouri has to play Kentucky, they travel to Lexington, on and on and on and on and on. Just one issue. On Monday, the single biggest bubble to date that has been put out there was completely eliminated. It was set for Orlando, and it was set to have 10 individual tournaments take place that are all owned and sponsored by ESPN. So it included the Champions Classic, the Wooden Classic, the Jimmy V Classic, the Orlando Invitational, and as I said a minute ago, it included some of the biggest brands in college basketball. Kentucky, Michigan State, Kansas, Duke are part of the Champions Classic. The Jimmy V Classic was supposed to have Gonzaga and Tennessee. The Wooden Classic was supposed to have UCLA and Kansas, Michigan State, Gonzaga. I could go on, but the point was all of the biggest names essentially in college basketball were supposed to head to Orlando to start the season. It is now canceled. It doesn't mean those tournaments are canceled, but it means the events themselves in Orlando were canceled. And the reason it's so crazy is because it felt like if there was one place that we could safely pull off a bubble, it was going to be Orlando, right? ESPN has the experience of doing it in Orlando. Orlando has the experience of hosting an event of this magnitude. They just did it with the NBA. They did it with the MLS. And so when you hear it's canceled, the next logical question is why? And so this is kind of interesting. Essentially, ESPN, which runs the event, could not agree to testing protocols with all of the teams, and some of the teams balked at the testing protocols. Two things specifically stood out in terms of why they couldn't play and why ESPN just called this whole thing off. The two protocols were specifically that if a player tests positive, the CDC recommends that they have to retest no later than 90 days after a positive test. And a lot of these conferences are like, dude, if they test positive, we're not testing them again, right? So that was one issue. Some conferences don't believe that it's necessary to keep testing after a player tests positive. That's one thing. ESPN had a problem with that. That's a CDC recommendation. And so that was one deal. The other deal was that if players did test positive upon arriving in Orlando or even when they got there and had been there for a while, they would be required to quarantine for 14 days. And a lot of these schools are like, dude, we're not putting up a kid in a hotel for 14 days by himself to do nothing. Half of these teams weren't even going to be in Orlando for 14 days. I mean, you look at a school like Kentucky, they were scheduled to play, unless I'm mistaken, they're scheduled to play one game in the Champions Classic and leave. So, we're not quarantining for 14 days, and we're not even going to be there for 14 days. And so these were the two hiccups as it pertained to ESPN. Now, some of you are probably wondering, why is ESPN so caught up on these protocols? And I will tell you, that was the single biggest question for me when I heard this story and I kind of really started digging in. Because I think you could make a case that while it's really bad for Kentucky and Kansas and Duke to lose these big marquee out-of-conference games, you know who's the biggest loser with all of these out-of-conference games being canceled? It's ESPN itself, who now has nothing to broadcast in the middle of the week. And I was stunned when I saw this news because I thought to myself, wait a second now, ESPN has more at stake than anybody here. If ESPN can't get these events off the ground, from the middle of November until the middle of December, right around Christmas time, they got nothing to broadcast in the middle of the week except for a MAC football game here or there. And so I was trying to figure it out, and my understanding is the reason that it got canceled, the reason that ESPN was so uptight about its policies is that ESPN was actually getting its directives from Disney and Disney's lawyers. Keep in mind, if the games were played in Orlando, it would be at Wide World of Sports. It's owned by Disney. And Disney's lawyers were very specific as to what they expected these teams to do. The teams were not willing to oblige, and now all these events have been moved from Orlando. And so it's a huge piece of news. It's in many ways, a cataclysmic, devastating piece of news because of the fact that you had all these great games. It was going to be a great stage for college basketball, and now literally everybody is scrambling. And when I say literally everybody, Kentucky is scrambling, Duke is scrambling, Gonzaga, UCLA, everybody is scrambling because they thought at the very least, hey, we got these 3, 2, 4, whatever amount of games lined up to start the season, and we're good to go. Now, those games aren't going to happen, or at least they're certainly not going to happen under the context that we originally thought they were. And so that's the bad news. But I also think that there was a conclusion that was jumped to on Monday that I don't necessarily believe to be the case and to be accurate. And that conclusion was, well, this is canceled and it screws Kentucky and it screws Michigan State and it screws Kansas. So are we just going to go to conference-only games like we did in college football? And the answer to that question is no. As a matter of fact, not only is it no, or I believe it's no, and we'll get to it at the end, because listen, I do believe there are certain conferences that are just going to say, let's play league-only games, let's play 2 games a week in the same site, whatever. But I don't believe that this news is necessarily the death of out-of-conference basketball for 2020, 2021, as many people kind of reported off the top. And if anything, in making phone calls on Monday, I actually think it's the opposite. I actually think that event organizers all across the country, this kind of pumped them full of oxygen. This kind of regave them life, and it kind of made them say, wait a second now. We were trying to put on this event, and we had a bunch of crappy teams that nobody cared about. And now Duke's looking for games, and Kentucky's looking for games, and Kansas is looking for games. This is awesome. And I know of at least 2 event organizers, because I was on the phone with them talking today, that said, like, we're on the phone. We're working the phone trying to get those teams to play where we're playing. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, right? So a lot of bubbles have been reported, but let's just take, for example, there is one that is going to be played at the Mohegan Sun Casino in Connecticut. This one obviously hits close to me. I'm from Connecticut. I've been to Mohegan Sun many times. And what you need to know is Mohegan Sun is this massive casino, hotel attached to it. There's actually an arena attached to it. It's where the WNBA team in Connecticut plays their games. And they host all sorts of events throughout the year and whatever. And so I think the thought when all these games are canceled in Orlando is, well, we're just going to go to a league-only game. Instead, it's the exact opposite, like I just said a minute ago. You don't think Mohegan Sun is licking its lips, licking its chops, trying to get Kentucky or Kansas or Duke to their event, where they already have, by the way, Virginia's going to be there, UConn's going to be there, Florida, is going to be there. Villanova, I believe, will be stopping in for a game or two. USC. And now all of a sudden, you get to maybe bring in Kentucky and get them a game or two. Bring in Kansas, get them a game or two. Bring in Duke or get them a game or two. That's got people licking their lips, man. And so I'm telling you, not only was the Orlando cancellation not the end of out-of-conference basketball as we know it, I think it was the opposite. I think it's got more people on the phone doing more to get more teams to where they're going to be playing. And like I said, it only makes sense in this world that we live in where everybody is struggling economically to try to pull these events off. Think about it from Mohegan Sun's perspective. You have, say, 20 teams coming in. Now you can bring in 25, 30, 40. Think about all the extra hotel rooms that you'll sell, all the extra people that you can put to work, the house cleaners that you can bring back to work, the restaurants that you can reopen, the cooks that you're taking off unemployment. It is a great thing for the economy of that area of Connecticut. It's great for the casino itself, and they believe that they can safely pull off this event, and frankly, not even pull off this event. But beyond that, they can pull it off in a way in which the players aren't even interacting with anybody from outside the bubble, outside of their traveling party in the college basketball games itself. So not only are games not canceled, I think it's going to make for some better events in other places. I mentioned Mohegan Sun. I'll tell you this. John Rothstein reported on Monday that, what did he report on Monday? Oh, he reported that the Champions Classic, they still want to play it, and that maybe Indianapolis will be a host. I haven't talked to anybody in Indy, but I think it's very much the same thing. Indy's saying, hey, wait a second now. We can play this at the convention center. We can fill our hotel. We can have all sorts of good teams playing. And oh, by the way, if we can get Kentucky, Kansas, Duke, Michigan State, 2-3 million people are watching that on a Tuesday night. It's a great opportunity to market the city. It's a great opportunity to market the areas surrounding the city. And it shows that we can pull off these big events, especially on short notice. Another place, and you're going to laugh at this, that I think is going to benefit from this hugely. You're going to laugh, I swear. It's South Dakota. Of all places, I think South Dakota is going to benefit most from this Orlando cancellation. And you're probably shaking your head like, South Dakota, what are you talking about, bro? But South Dakota has emerged as a real player in these bubble college basketball games. Remember, they took on the Battle for Atlantis. When the Battle for Atlantis left the Bahamas, it's going to South Dakota. And you know why it's going to South Dakota? It's because they have some of the loosest restrictions of anywhere in the country. As a matter of fact, I looked it up. My understanding is, and if we have any listeners in South Dakota, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is the state never really closed in any capacity since the beginning of COVID back in March. Now, maybe they made some recommendations, but I don't think anything ever officially closed in South Dakota. And so they have some of the loosest restrictions. From my understanding, they may even allow fans in the stands. That's how loose the restrictions are. They also have a hospital that if it's not literally attached to the arena, it's essentially right down the street. Hospital can handle testing. Hospital can handle any issues popping up. They already have the Battle for Atlantis. They already have a Gonzaga, Iowa game. And I think South Dakota, of all places, may become a real player in college basketball. But the point I'm trying to make is that for people who saw the news on Monday and thought, oh my God, I was so looking forward to that Kansas-Kentucky game to start the season. I was so looking forward to the Jimmy V Classic, Tennessee-Gonzaga. I still think those games are going to get played in some capacity, or at the very least, people are going to continue to fight to get them. And again, I think a lot of places that weren't planning on having these big crazy bubbles are now looking around saying, we might be able to get Kansas over here. We might be able to get Duke or Gonzaga or Michigan State. And so I don't think it's time yet to worry about the out-of-conference portion of college basketball. I still think these games are going to be played. I would add, you know who else has incentive to figure it out is ESPN, because as I said a minute ago, outside of some MAC football, there's really not much that they're going to have to broadcast here over the next couple months now that the NBA season is done. On top of all that, one other thought on this, and that is, you know who else is going to potentially benefit this? Is these small on-campus multi-team events. And for people who are kind of new to the college basketball jargon, whatever, blah, 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 these multi-team events are basically, again, you bring 3 teams in, you play 2 games, or you bring in 6 teams, you play 3 games, whatever. And as time has gone on, more and more schools are just hosting their own events. Kentucky's hosting its own event. Duke is hosting its own event. Louisville is hosting its own event. On and on and on and on and on. And I think as time goes on, more schools are just going to say, you know what, screw it. We're not going to wait on the whims of what's going to happen in Orlando or Mohegan Sun or South Dakota, AT's favorite spot, South Dakota, Mr. South Dakota AT. Instead, we're just going to bring 6 or 8 teams here. We're going to decide what the testing protocols are. We're going to decide how often, what's safe and what isn't. We're going to play a bunch of games, and we're going to get ready for our conference slate. And I do think in that case, I don't think it would necessarily be the craziest, sexiest matchups of all time. For example, Kentucky's tournament that they're already running has, I forget who, Detroit Mercy, I believe, with Brad Calipari, and a couple other teams, Morehead State maybe. But the point of those events isn't to have the best made-for-TV events. It's just to get games on the schedule so you can get your guys ready for conference play. I saw, again, John Rothstein talked about it. Me and John have been, I don't know if we're talking to the same people or what, but he said that as I got set to record here on Monday night, that UCLA and San Diego State are working to host an event in California at the Viejas Arena, which is where San Diego State plays, because UCLA and San Diego State are both like, screw this, dude. We were supposed to go to Orlando. We're not going to deal with this crap anymore. Let's put on our own game. But this is all a very long-winded way of me saying that while it was a very concerning story that came out on Monday afternoon, I don't believe that it's the end of college basketball's out-of-conference slate as we know it. Now, I would say this. Things are always subject to change. Certain states are going to be more hesitant than others. Certain venues are going to be more hesitant than others. And this is always subject to change. And so when somebody asked me on Monday, are we definitely getting out of conference games, what I would say, what I did say to them and what I would say to them, I think it's going to feel a lot like football by the time all is said and done. I think every league is going to have slightly different protocols, slightly different testing, slightly different whatever. And what will probably end up happening realistically is that, yeah, there's probably going to be some conferences. I can think off the top of my head, I would think the Ivy League would qualify as this. That'll probably just say, you know what, if we're going to play this season, let's just play league only. We don't need to be traveling all over the country. We don't need to be playing a bunch of games. Who cares? Let's just get our 18 to 22 league games in and get the heck out of here. I certainly think that can happen, but I do think that as we get set here, that we are talking about a scenario where right now, I do believe that if anything, that we are going to get out of conference basketball in some way, shape, or form. I just don't know what it's going to look like. And like I said, it's going to be completely subject to change. But there are a lot of people in college basketball right now that are doing everything they can to put on these events.